The scent of freshly cut grass always settled deep into my soul, a quiet affirmation of peace in Willow Creek, Ohio. My home, a modest two-story with a wraparound porch, felt like a sanctuary, especially after the turbulence of my past. Imara Kincaid, at 42 years old, had meticulously built this calm brick by painstaking brick, nurturing the flower beds and watching my children chase fireflies in the twilight. My partner, a man of quiet strength and endless patience, often joined me on the porch, a silent sentinel against the world's harsh edges. We had sought out Willow Creek precisely for this: its gentle rhythm, its unassuming charm, the promise of a life unmarred by the sharp stings of malicious gossip. My history was a heavy cloak I wore, folded neatly and tucked away, but never truly discarded. Having been ostracized from a previous community, shattered by a relentless campaign of false accusations and malicious whispers, I had learned a brutal lesson. Slander, I discovered, was an insidious poison, capable of dismantling lives, eroding trust, and leaving scars that ran far deeper than any physical wound. It was a silent weapon, wielded by cowards, and its power lay in its unseen spread, its ability to corrupt perception. This past experience had forged within me a quiet resolve, a new kind of purpose. I had become an observer, a patient student of human nature, dedicated to understanding how such venom was spun, and more importantly, how it could be disarmed. My motivation, therefore, was not merely to protect my own sanctuary, but to subtly dismantle the power of similar slanderous individuals wherever I encountered them. I had, in a way, become the architect of subtle retribution, a quiet force against the unseen warfare of words. Our immediate neighbors, the Gables, were an elderly couple who had lived in their faded yellow house for decades. Mr. Gable was a stoic man, often seen tinkering in his garage or tending to his perfectly manicured lawn, offering a curt nod of acknowledgement when our paths crossed. Mrs. Gable, however, was a different story. Her eyes, often narrowed, missed nothing. She sat on her porch swing for hours, a sentinel, her gaze sweeping over the street with an almost predatory interest. I had noted it, of course, with my perceptive nature. I always noticed things. The way her lips would purse when a loud car drove by, the way her head would subtly tilt towards any raised voice. I'd simply filed it away, a harmless eccentricity of an old woman, or so I thought. The first tremor in my carefully constructed piece arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a seemingly innocuous event that would unravel into a full-blown assault on my sanity. I was watering my petunias when I noticed a small, brown package nestled on our doorstep, clearly addressed to the Gable residence. A simple mistake by the delivery driver, easily rectified. My first instinct, born of neighborly politeness and a genuine desire to maintain good relations in this new, peaceful haven, was to simply walk it over. I hesitated for only a moment, a faint whisper of my past cautioning me, but I brushed it aside. This was Willow Creek, not the cesspool of my previous life. I approached their door, package in hand, and rang the bell. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Gable, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her floral apron spotless. Her smile initially was wide and disarmingly kind. "Oh dear, thank you so much," she exclaimed, her voice surprisingly sweet. "That silly delivery man always gets things mixed up." I returned her smile, feeling a warmth that reassured me Willow Creek truly was different. "No problem at all, Mrs. Gable, happy to help." She took the package, her eyes twinkling. Then her gaze drifted past my shoulder, over my head, and landed squarely on my house, the one I had just left. And in that instant her face transformed. The sweetness vanished, replaced by a snide, almost malevolent smirk. It was a shift so abrupt, so dramatic, it almost took my breath away. My perceptive nature immediately recognized the telltale signs: the tightening around the eyes, the subtle sneer that lifted one corner of her mouth, the complete absence of warmth. "You know them?" she asked, her voice dropping conspiratorially, her eyes still fixed on my home. My heart gave a sharp, unpleasant lurch. Air in my lungs seemed to catch. My mind, quick and analytical, processed the situation with alarming speed. She didn't know I lived there. This was an opportunity, a dangerous one perhaps, but an opportunity nonetheless. My patient nature kicked in, urging me to listen, to gather information. This was the first hint of her true colors, a glimpse behind the facade. "No," I replied, my voice calm, almost too calm. "Haven't met them actually, just moved in myself a few blocks over." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but it was necessary. I needed to understand the depth of the well from which her malice sprang, her eyes gleamed. She gestured wildly towards my home, her voice rising in a theatrical whisper. "Well, let me tell you, dear, you're lucky. They are a real nuisance, a real problem." A slow, chilling dread began to seep into my veins. This was it. This was the opening salvo. "Oh," I murmured, feigning polite curiosity. "What seems to be the trouble?" And then it began. The tirade, a torrent of venom that flowed effortlessly from her lips, each word a poisoned dart aimed directly at my family, at my carefully constructed piece. "That man," she declared, pointing a bony finger towards my front yard where my partner had recently been mowing. He smokes weed, all hours of the day. The smell, dear, it's just dreadful, permeates the whole neighborhood. My blood ran cold. My partner, a man who barely touched alcohol, let alone anything else, smoking weed. It was an outrageous, utterly fabricated lie. My mind instantly conjured the image of the narrow, overgrown path that ran between our house and the next, a secluded spot where local youths occasionally gathered after school, leaving behind the faint, telltale scent of cannabis. Mrs. Gable from her perch must have seen figures, smelled something, and simply assumed. And then she had fabricated. The malicious gossip, the false accusation, it was playing out right before my eyes, a sickening echo of my past. And she continued, leaning closer, her voice thick with false sympathy. I see him a lot with children, but I never ever see the woman. Never. She paused, then unleashed a short, brittle laugh. She must not get out much, that one. Probably locked up in there, doesn't know what's going on, poor thing. The words hit me like a physical blow. She must not get out much, me. The woman who spent hours tending her garden, volunteering at the local library, walking her children to school. The woman who cherished her privacy, yes, but was far from a recluse. It was so deeply personal, so utterly invasive, born of pure fabrication and a perverse joy in judgment. My breath hitched in my throat. The mortification was immediate, a hot flush spreading across my face, not from embarrassment, but from the raw anger of being so casually, so viciously misjudged and slandered. This wasn't just an elderly neighbor grumbling. This was a direct, targeted attack on my family's character, my partner's reputation, and my very presence in this community. He reported them, Mrs. Gable boasted, puffing out her chest slightly. To the authorities about the smoking, but nothing ever comes of it. They probably just laugh it off, probably think I'm just a silly old woman. She narrowed her eyes again, a glint of genuine frustration showing through her performative indignation. All the while I just stood there, a practiced smile plastered on my face, nodding, agreeing. Oh, that's not good, I echoed, my voice surprisingly steady. Sounds like a real problem. Every fiber of my being screamed to expose her, to reveal her cruelty, to shatter her self-satisfied smirk. But my patient nature, the very core of my strategy, held me back. I was observing. I was learning. This was invaluable information. This woman, this seemingly sweet elderly neighbor, was a walking, talking weapon of character assassination. She was the very type of individual my motivation called me to dismantle. Just as my composure threatened to crack, a lifeline appeared. Mr. Gable emerged from the house, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, a faint scent of motor oil clinging to him. He saw me, and his eyes widened slightly in recognition. He knew who I was. He had seen me in the yard, seen me with my partner and children. He had exchanged polite greetings. Ah, Mara, he said, his voice a low rumble, nodding at me. Thanks for bringing that over, much appreciated. Mrs. Gable's head snapped towards him, her brow furrowing. For a terrifying second, I thought she would connect the dots, that the mask would fall, and I would be left standing there, exposed as the very person she had just so gleefully slandered. But Mr. Gable, bless his taciturn soul, seemed to have offered me an out, perhaps even an unintentional rescue. His gaze held mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it pity, a silent apology? I couldn't tell. I seized the moment. Oh, no problem at all, Mr. Gable, I said, my smile still fixed but now tinged with a desperate need to escape. Just glad it got to you safely. Well, I better get back inside. Lots to do. I backed away slowly, offering one last nod, then turned and practically ran back to my house, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical burden. The door shut behind me with a soft click, a flimsy barrier against the torrent of emotions raging inside. My partner, hearing the hurried footsteps, came out from the kitchen, a questioning look on his face. I recounted the entire horrifying exchange, the words tumbling out in a rush, laced with disbelief and a simmering rage. He listened, his eyes growing wide, then burst into laughter. She said I smoke weed and you don't get out enough, he chuckled, shaking his head. That's wild, Mara, absolutely wild. His amusement, while understandable, grated against my raw nerves. For him, it was a funny anecdote. For me, it was a trigger, a chilling echo of the past that had nearly destroyed me. The laughter eventually died down, replaced by a quiet understanding in his eyes as he saw the true impact it had on me. Mara, he said, his voice soft, we don't have to deal with this. We can just ignore her, she's an old woman. But I couldn't, not this time. My initial sense of peace had been shattered, a hairline fracture running through the foundation of my sanctuary. The sting of being so casually, so maliciously, slandered by a neighbor I barely knew, whose very presence now felt like a toxic cloud hovering over my home, was a wound too familiar. This wasn't just about weed or my perceived social life. It was about the insidious nature of gossip, the power of false narratives, and the very thing I was now motivated to dismantle. Mrs. Gable was not merely a nuisance, she was a threat. And I, Mara Kincaid, the architect of subtle retribution, knew with a cold certainty that this was only the beginning. This was a battle I would not walk away from. I had found my target and the game had begun. Act 2. Struggle, the escalation and attempts at resolution. The initial mortification of that Tuesday afternoon transmuted into a quiet, simmering resolve. I couldn't simply ignore Mrs. Gable, not with my past haunting my periphery. The thought of letting another campaign of malicious gossip take root, especially in my own home, was anathema. My carefully cultivated peace had been compromised, and my motivation, long dormant but deeply ingrained, now stirred. My role as the architect of subtle retribution was no longer an abstract concept. It was a burgeoning necessity. My first attempts at resolution were predictably subtle. I am, after all, a patient woman. I believed, perhaps naively, that some gentle correction, some visible proof might deter her. I began by making my presence more visible. I started spending more time in the front yard, gardening, sitting on the porch swing reading, walking the children more frequently down the sidewalk. I waved to neighbors, exchanged pleasantries, making it undeniably clear that the woman who never gets out was, in fact, quite present. My partner, understanding my underlying strategy, made a point of tidying the front yard, ensuring no lingering scent of rogue youths could be misconstrued. He even installed a small, strategically placed outdoor camera, ostensibly for security, but secretly for documentation. My resourcefulness was already kicking in. For a few weeks, it seemed to have a minor effect. Mrs. Gable's porch sentry duty continued, but her gaze, when it landed on me, was less sneering, more a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. She'd offer a curt, almost begrudging nod. This brief lull, however, was merely the eye of the storm. Then came the first formal complaint. A police cruiser, lights off but unmistakable, pulled slowly up our driveway one sunny afternoon. A young, polite officer stepped out, clipboard in hand. Mara Kincaid. He asked, a professional smile on his face. Yes, officer, is everything all right? My heart hammered a nervous rhythm against my ribs. We received a complaint about excessive marijuana odor emanating from your property, he stated, his voice neutral. He glanced around our pristine yard, then up at the house, a hint of skepticism playing on his features. I felt a cold wave of déjà vu wash over me. The same old song, a different verse. Officer, I can assure you there's no marijuana on this property. My partner and I don't use it. We have young children. I gestured towards the play structure in the backyard. There's a public path that runs between our house and the gables, just over there. Teenagers often use it, and sometimes, yes, the smell drifts over. It's a known issue in the neighborhood. I kept my voice calm, factual, my patient nature guiding me. The officer nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the path. We've had reports about that path before. We'll check it out. For now, there's no evidence of anything here, ma'am, just wanted to follow up. He paused, then added, complainant was an anonymous tip, but the address given for the source of the smell was yours. He didn't say it, but the unspoken implication hung in the air. Mrs. Gable. She had doubled down, going from private slander to official accusation. She hadn't just gossiped, she had actively sought to bring formal repercussions upon us. The officer left, but the incident left a bitter taste. The peace felt truly violated now. This wasn't just about embarrassment, it was about our integrity, our reputation. My partner, usually unflappable, was furious. Anonymous tip, my foot, he fumed. That old hag is obsessed. This is harassment. I agreed, though my anger was colder, more focused. She's trying to weaponize the system, just like the last time, but she's sloppy. My perceptive mind was already cataloging. She claimed anonymity, but her description of the issue was too precise, too personal, aligning perfectly with what she'd told me on the porch. She was predictable, which was a weakness. The false marijuana complaints became a recurring nightmare. Every few weeks, another police visit, another polite but time-consuming inquiry. Each time they found nothing. Each time our frustration grew. It drained our time, our energy, and slowly chipped away at our sense of security. Then came the boundary. Mrs. Gable began making increasingly aggressive claims about our shared property line. Your sprinkler system is watering my side of the fence. She'd shout over the fence when I was in my garden, despite the fact our sprinklers were clearly set to spray inwards. Your children's ball landed in my petunias, they've ruined them. Even when the ball was clearly on our side of the fence or had bounced harmlessly off the wooden slats. It was petty, incessant, and utterly exhausting. My children, once carefree, began to eye the Gable house with apprehension, their laughter muted when they played in the yard. This hit me hard. My children's innocence was being tainted by this woman's malice. My patient nature was being tested. I continued to document everything. Dates, times, specific accusations. I started a dedicated notebook, filling pages with detailed observations. My resourcefulness led me to contact a local surveyor to get our property lines clearly marked, an expense I hadn't anticipated but deemed necessary. The surveyor's report unequivocally showed that Mrs. Gable's claims were unfounded. I even politely presented the findings to her, hoping reason would prevail. She merely scoffed, declaring the surveyor clearly incompetent and biased. The escalation continued. One morning, I woke up to find our trash cans, neatly placed at the curb for collection, overturned, their contents strewn across our driveway. Cereal boxes, discarded mail, old coffee grounds, a messy, disheartening tableau. I knew with a sinking certainty who was responsible. The security camera, however, had only captured a shadowy figure in the pre-dawn hours, too indistinct to definitively identify. Mrs. Gable from her porch was already observing the mess, her expression a mixture of feigned sympathy and thinly veiled satisfaction. "Oh dear, Mara," she called out, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Looks like you have a problem with raccoons. Happens all the time." I forced a tight smile. "Funny, it's never happened before, Mrs. Gable." She merely shrugged, a subtle, smug twitch at the corner of her mouth betraying her. The emotional and psychological toll began to weigh heavily. Sleep became restless, punctuated by anxiety. Every unexpected knock at the door, every unfamiliar car on the street, sent my heart into a frantic flutter. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. I found myself constantly scanning the Gables house, checking the cameras, my guard perpetually up. My partner grew increasingly frustrated, his easygoing nature strained by the constant tension. He urged me to confront her directly, to just get it over with. But I knew instinctively that this would only escalate the direct conflict, giving her more fodder for her gossip machine. She thrived on direct confrontation, on drama. My patient strategy dictated a different approach. The community began to feel the ripple effects. Mrs. Gable, it seemed, was not content with merely targeting us. She began to subtly poison the well of public opinion. At neighborhood gatherings, at the local grocery store, I would catch glimpses of whispered conversations, hurried glances in my direction. Old Mrs. Henderson, usually so friendly, now seemed distant. Mr. Davison, who usually complimented my garden, avoided eye contact. It was the same familiar pattern, the slow erosion of reputation through insidious, unverified claims. My past trauma resurfaced with chilling clarity. This was exactly how it started last time. The malicious gossip, the false accusations, slowly turning an entire community against you, leaving you ostracized, isolated. This was her power, and it was devastatingly effective. I hit rock bottom one cold autumn evening. My daughter, usually so bright and bubbly, came home from school in tears. "Mommy," she sobbed, burying her face in my shirt, "Sarah's mom said. She said Daddy smokes bad things and that you're never around. She said we shouldn't play with us anymore." The words were like daggers piercing through my carefully constructed composure. My children. This was no longer just about me or even my partner. This was about the innocent souls I was trying to protect, their childhoods being marred by the spite of a bitter old woman. The pain was immense, sharper than any I had felt before. I held my daughter tight, my own eyes welling up, a profound sense of helplessness washing over me. I felt utterly trapped, caught in a web of lies spun by someone who clearly reveled in chaos. My patient observation, my careful documentation, my subtle attempts at correction, they had all failed. She was too entrenched, too determined to cause harm. That night, staring out at the darkened Gable house, a profound, chilling realization settled over me. Conventional methods would not work. Politeness, reason, even official complaints were useless against someone who operated solely on malice and fabrication. I had allowed her to define the terms of the engagement. But I was Mara Kincaid, the architect of subtle retribution. My motivation to dismantle the power of slanderous individuals demanded a different approach. A more strategic, more decisive one. I would not allow my family to be ostracized again. I would not allow this woman to win. The game had changed. I would not just respond, I would orchestrate. The rock bottom had revealed the true depth of the problem, and with it, the necessity of a true, lasting solution. The blueprint for Mrs. Gable's downfall, however subtle, began to form in the darkest corners of my mind. The long night stretched ahead, filled with quiet contemplation, fueled by a rekindled fire of resolve. Act 3. Resolution, the confrontation, consequences, and aftermath. The despair of that night. Watching my daughter cry over Mrs. Gable's poison wasn't the end of my fight. It was the crucible that forged my unwavering resolve. The Mara who had timidly tried to wave away the problem with reason and patience was gone. In her place stood the architect, cold, calculated, and absolutely determined. My motivation to dismantle the power of slander was no longer just a desire, it was a mission. My traits, perceptive, resourceful, patient, had been sharpened by the relentless grind of Mrs. Gable's malice. I spent days, then weeks, in meticulous planning. I pored over my notebook, rereading every incident, every lie, every subtle cue. My perceptiveness allowed me to see patterns. Mrs. Gable never gossiped alone, she needed an audience. She always framed her accusations as concern, making them harder to refute directly without appearing defensive. She preyed on uncertainty and amplified minor incidents into monstrous fabrications. And crucially, her true weakness was her utter confidence in her own perceived cleverness and the invisibility of her malice. She believed herself untouchable, her words untraceable. My strategy was simple in its core but complex in its execution. Turn her greatest strength, her ability to spread gossip, into her ultimate undoing. I wouldn't confront her directly. I wouldn't even appear to confront her. Instead, I would engineer a situation where her own words, her own actions would be her downfall, publicly and irrevocably. I would empower the community itself to dismantle her power, effectively making them the agents of her retribution. My resourcefulness kicked into high gear. I cross-referenced the dates of police visits for the marijuana complaints with the days Mrs. Gable was visible on her porch, her gaze fixed on our property. I compiled a detailed timeline of her boundary disputes, complete with the surveyor's unambiguous report. I even researched the specific model of our security camera, ensuring its low-light capabilities were maximized for clearer, albeit still shadowy, nocturnal footage. The key was to provide irrefutable evidence, not just of her malice, but of her blatant falsehoods, and to do so in a way that she would initiate the exposure. The first step was to identify the right conduit. Mrs. Gable's power lay in her ability to sow discord among the otherwise harmonious neighborhood. But her constant complaining and subtle manipulations had also created quiet resentment among others. I began to subtly cultivate relationships with neighbors who, I suspected, harbored similar frustrations. Mrs. Henderson, for instance, had always seemed slightly uncomfortable when Mrs. Gable started her neighborhood critiques. Mr. Davison, despite his recent coolness towards me, was known for his strong sense of community integrity. I didn't immediately unburden myself. Instead, I started with small, unassuming acts of kindness, offering Mrs. Henderson some cuttings from my rose bushes, lending Mr. Davison a specialized tool I'd found my partner had for a home repair project. I made myself available, an open book, gently demonstrating through my actions that the rumors were baseless. My children, now coached without revealing the full extent of the issue, made a point of being polite and friendly to every neighbor, their natural innocence disarming any lingering prejudice. One crisp Saturday morning, as Mrs. Gable was out front pruning her azaleas, I decided to accidentally leave my notebook, the one filled with meticulous observations, on a bench near our shared property line within clear sight of her porch. It was open to a page detailing one of her more outlandish accusations about our children's ball playing. My security camera was discreetly positioned to capture a wide angle. I then went inside, ostensibly for a cup of tea, but actually to watch. Sure enough, within minutes I saw Mrs. Gable pause her pruning. Her head tilted. Her eyes, ever perceptive, landed on the notebook. Slowly, deliberately, she put down her shears and ambled over, feigning interest in my newly planted impatience. Then, as if an afterthought, she reached down, picked up the notebook, and furtively flipped through a few pages. Her eyes scanned, lingering on the detailed entries on my calm, objective descriptions of her escalating behavior. A flicker of something, perhaps confusion, perhaps recognition, crossed her face. Then she quickly snapped it shut, placed it back on the bench, and resumed her pruning, a little too vigorously. This was my initial test. She had seen some of it. Did she grasp the implication? Did she realize I was observing her? The next few days were quiet, almost eerily so. Mrs. Gable seemed to spend less time on her porch. But this quiet was merely the calm before the strategic storm. The true moment of orchestration came during the annual Willow Creek Fall Festival, a beloved community event held in the town square. It was the perfect stage. Mrs. Gable, ever the social arbiter, was always prominent, holding court, her voice carrying across the crowd. I had prepared. My resourceful nature had led me to create discreet, printed summaries of key pieces of my documentation, devoid of emotional language, just cold, hard facts. The dates and times of the marijuana complaints, the police reports anonymized, showing no evidence found, snippets of the surveyor's report about the property line, even a printed screenshot from my camera showing the shadowy figure near our trash cans, timestamped for 4 a.m. I didn't point fingers. I simply presented information that contradicted Mrs. Gable's narrative. I approached Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Davison, engaging them in casual conversation. "It's so lovely to see everyone out," I said genuinely as the scent of funnel cake filled the air. "It's just such a shame about some of the recent unpleasantness in the neighborhood." Mrs. Henderson sighed. "Oh, Mara, tell me about it. Mrs. Gable was just telling me about another one of your partner's late-night activities." Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. This was my cue. Patiently I responded, not defensively but with concern. "It's truly upsetting, Mrs. Henderson, when people spread misinformation, especially when it involves law enforcement." I paused, then continued, as if sharing a general observation. "It makes me wonder if there's a pattern or if someone has a particular agenda. It's almost as if some people thrive on creating drama." Mr. Davison, always keen on facts, raised an eyebrow. "Misinformation?" "Yes," I said, my voice low and earnest, as if sharing a worry. "For example, those marijuana complaints. Did you know the police have been out multiple times and each time they've confirmed there's absolutely no evidence of it? They even verified the smell often comes from the public path where teenagers gather. I pulled out one of my prepared sheets discreetly. I mean, it's just a matter of public record, really. It makes you wonder why someone would keep calling them knowing there's nothing there. I let the information hang in the air, a seed planted. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened slightly. Mr. Davison took the sheet, his brow furrowed in thought. He was the kind of man who would check facts. I casually mentioned the property line issue, providing another sheet with the surveyor's findings. It's all quite verifiable, I murmured. Just makes you question the source of the claims, doesn't it? My goal wasn't to badmouth Mrs. Gable directly, but to subtly dismantle her credibility, her power as a purveyor of truth. I wanted to empower other community members to ask questions, to look deeper, to see the pattern of malicious fabrication for themselves. This was my retribution, not revenge but revelation. The plan unfolded beautifully. Mr. Davison, a man of quiet integrity, did indeed investigate. He spoke to the local sheriff's department, confirming the repeated, unfounded calls originating from Mrs. Gable's general area. He also called the surveying company, confirming my report. Mrs. Henderson, a longtime resident, quietly began to compare notes with other neighbors. It turned out many had their own quiet grievances with Mrs. Gable's meddling, her gossiping, her constant, veiled criticisms. Some had their own stories of anonymous complaints about pet noise or lawn care, always unsubstantiated. The tension in the neighborhood began to shift. Mrs. Gable's words, once accepted with a nod and a sympathetic shake of the head, now met with thoughtful silences, even direct questions. "Are you sure about that, Mrs. Gable? I heard the police said there was nothing to those marijuana complaints." Or, "My son works for that surveying company, and they're usually very accurate about property lines." The turning point, the spectacular backfire I had orchestrated, came during the Willow Creek Neighborhood Association meeting, a month later. Mrs. Gable, emboldened by years of unchallenged dominance, decided to make a formal complaint about recreational drug use and disruptive behavior at my property, right there in the public forum. She stood up, her voice quivering with performative indignation, painting a vivid, utterly false picture of our home as a den of iniquity. She even pulled out a small, grainy photo she'd secretly taken of the path, claiming it showed my partner. "And I have repeatedly reported this," she declared, her eyes sweeping the room, anticipating murmurs of agreement. "But nothing has been done, our peace is being disturbed." A hush fell over the room. I remained silent, a picture of calm, my heart thrumming with anticipation. This was it. She had just publicly committed to her lies in front of the entire community. Then Mr. Davison slowly rose from his seat. "Madam Chair," he said, his voice firm and clear, "I would like to speak to this matter." He didn't launch into an attack. Instead, with a quiet authority, he presented the facts. "I've taken the liberty of verifying some of these claims. I've spoken with the sheriff's department. They confirm multiple calls regarding the Kincaid residence for alleged drug activity, and in every single instance, they found no evidence whatsoever. Their reports indicate the scent often emanates from the public path, which is a known issue for teenagers. Furthermore, the photo Mrs. Gable presented, if you look closely, shows figures on that very path, not on the Kincaid property." He paused, then continued, his gaze direct on Mrs. Gable. "I also spoke with the surveying company. The property lines between the Gables and the Kincaids are clearly established, and the Kincaid sprinklers are well within their bounds. The claims of property damage from a ball when the children were playing lawfully in their own yard also seem unsubstantiated." The room buzzed. Mrs. Gable's face, initially triumphant, slowly drained of color. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, brick by brick, right before her eyes. Other neighbors, empowered by Mr. Davison's lead, began to speak up, sharing their own experiences of Mrs. Gable's unfounded complaints or thinly veiled gossip. A collective realization dawned. Mrs. Gable wasn't a concerned neighbor, she was a serial slanderer. The chairperson, a stern but fair woman, banged her gavel. "Mrs. Gable," she stated, her voice cold, "this association takes allegations of harassment and false reporting very seriously. Your repeated, unsubstantiated complaints, which have now been disproven by multiple third-party sources and public records, constitute a violation of our community's conduct guidelines. We will be issuing a formal warning. Any further such actions will result in fines and potential legal action." Justice, subtle and deeply satisfying, was served. Mrs. Gable, the self-proclaimed moral compass of Willow Creek, was publicly exposed. Her power, built on the shifting sands of rumor and insinuation, collapsed under the weight of verifiable truth. Her words, once weapons, now became her shackles. She sat down, defeated, her face pale, no longer meeting anyone's eye. The aftermath was profound. The disruptive behavior ceased almost entirely. Mrs. Gable rarely left her house, and when she did, her once commanding presence was diminished, her gaze averted. Her whispers, once potent, were now dismissed as the ravings of a bitter old woman. The community, once subtly poisoned, began to heal. Neighbors who had distanced themselves from us now approached with apologies, their relief palpable. Our children's laughter returned to the yard, carefree and unburdened. The peace, shattered by the first ripple, returned stronger, deeper, rooted in the hard-won understanding of true community. My role as the architect of subtle retribution felt complete. I hadn't sought to destroy Mrs. Gable physically or financially, but to dismantle her ability to harm others with slander. Her power to spread malicious gossip was gone, her words now carrying the weight of their own falsehoods. My own past, the trauma of ostracization, began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph and an even deeper appreciation for the sanctuary I had created. And as for the final twist, months later, a for sale sign appeared in the Gables' yard. Mrs. Gable had become a pariah, her own home a prison of her making. But then an even stranger development occurred. Mr. Gable, who had remained mostly silent through the entire ordeal, approached me one evening. He handed me a small, folded piece of paper. "Mara," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I wanted to give you this. It's the full police report from when she called about the path, saying she saw her own son smoking marijuana with his friends near your house. She'd been doing it for years, ever since he moved out and wouldn't visit her as often. She tried to frame him, and then she tried to frame you." He paused, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow I hadn't realized he possessed. "She just liked to complain, Mara, about anyone who had something she didn't. My son, then you, then the new people. She was always like that. I'm sorry it took this for it to stop." He turned and walked away, leaving me stunned, holding the report. The final twist wasn't just her defeat, but the revelation of a deeper, more pervasive malice, one that extended even to her own family. Her need to slander, to dismantle others, was a fundamental part of her being, a sickness that had finally consumed her. She hadn't just been targeting us. We were just the latest victims in her long history of character assassination. Her downfall was not just our peace, but the quiet unraveling of a lifetime of bitterness. My home was truly a sanctuary again, a haven of peace restored by deliberate, strategic action. The scent of freshly cut grass now carried only the promise of tranquility. Subscribe to Neighbours from Hell channel for new Neighbours from Hell stories daily.